Oh, hey friends. Welcome to Andrea Lake 101, the making of a billionaire. What a fun episode I have for you today. This story is literally, legitimately, Jerry Hicks himself, the man himself, told me it is the best law of attraction story he's ever heard. I was at lunch with Jerry and Esther Hicks, and I told him this whole long ass story. And it's full of intrigue and surprise and high highs and low lows and a little bit of heartbreak, some success, and very sadly, some very significant failure. So this is going to fall under our series called The Past, where I tell you about stories from my past. And in this story, we're going to cover the creation of one of my companies that I have barely ever publicly talked about. It was called Zoco Inc. ZOKO, and it did subscription-based websites for best-selling spiritual authors, like all the Oprah authors, Gary Zukov, Don Miguel Ruiz. This story even has ties and mentions of Arnold Schwarzenegger, what the fuck, and Deepak Chopra. Oh, this story is wild. This story is wild, 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 wild. Sit back, relax, and buckle up for the ride on another rainy day in usually sunny San Diego to St. Patrick's Day. I am wearing green. For those of you listening on audio only, I have an adorable sweatshirt that says, "Can I bring my dog?" And it is my St. Patty's Day sweatshirt. Okay, so this story actually starts in 1998. And my father had become sick with cancer. He was given 3 months to live. He ended up living for 9 months. And he handled his death in this extraordinarily good way, at least from my perception of it. It obviously was the saddest day of my life when he sat down and told me. And then he started really meditating and reading a lot of spiritual books. And my dad already had given me the Tony Robbins Awakening the Giant book with him when I was 11 years old. But when he actually was dying, he gave me the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, and it sort of changed my life. It kind of cracked open my awareness. I think that I was so young when my dad got sick. I was 22 when he got sick and 23 when he passed away. And I was just really looking for answers in a way that I hadn't been before. And I already had done the Artist's Way. My dad gave me that book when I was 19. Anybody who hasn't done that book, it's by this author, Julia Cameron, who's brilliant and shows these little workshops and exercises that sort of unleashes your inner artist, inner creative. Even though I'm a business person, I made those rhythm sticks from scratch. That was my first company. And I always have felt like what I do is very artistic, just in choosing all the different design for the business and working with artists, especially on coloration, and just sort of having that eye to know what people are going to buy and sell. So I loved that book. So I already was open to more spiritual stuff. And I had started doing morning pages, which is a journaling practice from the Artist's Way, and started meditating every morning when I was 19 years old. And I was vegetarian and all of the things that you would imagine. And so when my dad is sick and dying, he gives me the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. And I was like, whoa, there's so many more answers to life's deep questions. And of course, the internet didn't exist. I mean, come on, this is 1992. And there was no Google machine. There was no cool influencers that were, saying different types of practices to do while you're grieving. So then, of course, the time comes and my dad does pass away. And then I'm really looking for answers, but I don't know where to find them. And so I'm going to the bookstore, and I went to the section that the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying was in, and kind of was reading some other books, mostly on Eastern philosophies. But nothing is really resonating with me. And I know that I want to understand more about why we're here on Earth. What are we doing here? And also to find my own personal equanimity, because around that age, I started having panic attacks, which were, terrifying. And thank God I stopped having them in my late 20s and never have one again. But they were terrifying, and I was having social anxiety, and these weren't things that anybody was talking about. So kind of everyone was privately just dealing with stuff like that and feeling like they were the only ones, and etc. It was the 90s were hard. So my dad passes away in 1999, and I'm seeking for all these things, but I'm sort of not finding the answers I'm looking for. And I had started my clothing company, Anti-Establishment Clothing, which is a fuck you t-shirt company. That's right. That's how I made my first $1 million, selling fuck you t-shirts. True facts. So life is going well for me in so many ways, but I'm lost, as I have lost my dad. And I think it was a couple years after he died, or 18 months or something after he died. and I got the flu, which was like so super duper unusual for me. Now, I promise you, Jerry Hicks himself said this is the best law of attraction story. So just hang in there with me. There's a big circle, and all of the stuff that happens early is important later. I get the flu, and I had this assistant that sort of did everything for me at this time because like the companies are going really well. And she came over to pick up a bunch of work and like to drop off coffee, which was lovely of her because I did not want to get a caffeine headache on top of having the flu, and food for the day. And she just like barely cracked open my front door and put it on a counter and ran outside. And I only was sick for 24 hours. It was this weird 24-hour thing. And I didn't own a television for my whole adult life. I gave away my TVs when I was 19. I did not see television again until the 2020 lockdowns, really, in any kind of significant way. And I never owned a television. But I have been dating this guy who just would find it unconscionable to think that he could possibly be at my house on a Sunday and not be able to watch football. So when we broke up, he like left a TV there, and I just hadn't gotten around to getting rid of it yet. And so I'm like, oh, it's 4 o'clock, like Oprah's on. Maybe I'll just turn on the Oprah show. It's the only thing that I remembered still was on television because I hadn't had a TV in like 5 or 6 years at this point. And sure enough, Oprah's on, and there's this author that is on there that has written this book called The Seat of the Soul. And I can't even really follow what he's saying because I am really ill. Like I have a fever, I'm not doing well. But it felt important to me. It felt important to me. And he was talking about like physics and spirituality and a bunch of different things that were really interesting to me. And even though it felt important, I just immediately turned off the TV when it was done and went back to sleep. Then 3 weeks later, the exact same thing happens. And when I tell you I never get sick, I probably hadn't been sick in like 4 or 5 years, so healthy. And, did yoga all the time. I ate super healthy. I was vegetarian. I didn't drink alcohol. I didn't do any kind of drugs. I just was super healthy. And I got a little 24-hour bug again 3 weeks later. So again, same drill. My assistant brings stuff over and I'm just like bored and I'm in bed and I never would take days off. So I'm like working from bed and it's 4 o'clock and I'm like, oh, I guess I'll watch Oprah. So I turn it on and it is the same show. It's not just the same guy on Oprah because Gary Zukav had been on Oprah like 54 times or something. He's one of the most, he's one of the most booked guests on the Oprah show. And it wasn't just the same guy on the Oprah show, it was the same show. Okay, I understand enough, but growing up in Southern California, I understand enough about how television works and how studios work. Like that is not a thing. They don't re-air the same episode of a show 3 weeks after they aired the original. It's just a mistake. Like they would parse out episodes like that. Even if they were doing a rerun of an old episode, they would only do that one once a year, especially back then in network television, because there were only like 3 main networks. And I didn't have cable or anything. So this was on like free television that used to come into people's houses. My God, I feel so old. And so anyhow, all of a sudden, immediately, like in the flash of an eye, I no longer feel sick, like at all. My fever goes away immediately and I'm completely present. And something in my mind said as if it was out loud in my head, pay attention. And so I'm focusing completely on this and all of a sudden it's starting to make sense. And it's about like the continuity of the universe. And it had a lot of big answers that I was looking for. So I immediately ordered the books. Like one of the first books that I ever order on Amazon is The Seat of the Soul, and I just fell in love with it. I read it. I couldn't even really understand it the first time I read it because some of the physics concepts were difficult. So then I read books on physics to understand the physics concepts. And I read this book like over and over. I did all these writing exercises. He came out with The Heart of the Soul. I did that book. And then I started getting like Oprah's magazine, I think it was, and her recommended reading list. And I was reading all of these Oprah authors, all these spiritual authors in the late 90s, early 2000s. And then through a series of events, I moved to Sedona, Arizona, which I love, in 2002, and actually re-domicile my companies out to Sedona, Arizona, because we're doing so well and there's so much money and the internet exists now and I can live from anywhere. The Sticker Junkie website had launched and that really just did well pretty much straight away. We launched that in 99 and it just pretty much did good right from the beginning. I was selling tons of stuff to Hot Topic and anti-establishment clothing was going well. I get to Sedona And I've never lived anywhere but San Diego in my whole life. I grew up in San Diego, military family, submarine bases here. So I get to Sedona and have never lived anywhere else but San Diego. And it is it is a small town. It is a small town. And so it's like I didn't even realize all of the luxuries and all of the community and all of the stuff to do at night and the beach being like, where I lived at the beach in San Diego. I lived in Pacific Beach back then and had lived in Ocean Beach and had lived in Encinitas and La Jolla. I was in for a culture shock. Like back then, there was like hardly any good place to eat. Whole Foods was not there yet. So there's like a really hippie, crunchy, natural grocery store, which is actually really cool. I loved natural grocers. And it was a tiny town and Instagram didn't exist. And so we caught so many tourists. Sedona still back then was the main economy of the town was tourism. So it was like 5,000 to 7,000 tourists a week. And now I think it's like 15,000 to 20,000 tourists a week. The town has just exploded since I moved there. And there was just like nothing to do. There was a cafe that had passed through many hands, but that one of my friends, Jim, ended up owning called Ravenheart, which now is part of the Whole Foods. It's the Whole Foods Cafe now, but back then it was Ravenheart. And we all used to go there and we all used to congregate. And when Jim took it over and bought it, he put in like cribbage night and chess night. It's how I met my friends that I talk about, Jay and Forrest, was playing cribbage in Sedona in like the 90s. So I moved to this town. And I go to the cafe every night with like my journal and with my spiritual books and stuff. But what I'm realizing as I'm in this very isolated experience for the first time in my adult life, really, of living in the middle of absolute nowhere. And I had this big house that was on a 9.5 acres on a huge piece of land. So I didn't even have like community and neighbors, nothing. So I just start reading more and more. I start meditating. I start deepening my yoga practice. I really start falling in love with hiking. That's why I still live in Sedona, is that I hike every single day that I can hike. I hike. And I'm loving living there, but it's super isolated. And I'm wanting this time that I'm living in Sedona to be like, sort of like a spiritual journey for me, sort of like a Chautauqua. I really wanted to get over these panic attacks, which thank God I actually did end up getting through the panic attacks and never had one again after I did this like crazy self-guided meditation for a weekend, no drugs involved. And I literally never had a panic attack again. It was amazing. And I started to really, really deepen my meditation practice. And I was reading all of these books. So I read like every book by every spiritual author. I read like every book by Carolyn Myss and Deepak Chopra and Eckhart Tolle and Gary Zukov and Damodar Ruiz and any of those late 90s, early 2000s spiritual authors you can think of. I was reading all of them. But that's all there was. So then one day I went onto the interwebs back in the day in like 2002, and I typed in the websites for all of these spiritual authors. When I tell you, they were the worst. So the internet had just barely sort of baby started in the late 90s. Like, yes, we did have MySpace, but there was no sort of design elements. Like if you had a website that looked good, which our website looked sick, that's why we did $1 million worth of sales from anti-establishment clothing. Like nobody else had cool looking websites back then. And I know I've already told that story in another podcast, but it was a huge differentiator. And when I looked at the websites of like Gary Zukov and Damodar Ruiz and all of these different guys, mostly just looked like the back of a book cover. It looked like just somebody just did it like for free on a weekend, and the design just was not there. It just didn't look good, and there was no information. There was nothing to do other than basically like read their bio. They might have a contact us page for bookings, but there was nothing special going on most of them. Some of them did have like a little blog that just barely got updated. And I was like, man, I really wish there was more. Like I wish there was way more information. And then speaking of that author, Julia Cameron, she did an event in Sedona that I went to, and I was like, yeah, I wish some of the stuff from some of these different events that I can go to was incorporated more into the website. So I'm thinking about this, and I'm hiking and I'm meditating every day, at least for like a half hour to an hour. I'm doing like 1 to 3 hours of yoga a day, and I'm hiking for an hour or two a day, and I'm working. That's all I'm doing is hiking, working, meditating, and fulfilling all the orders for my companies. And as I'm like thinking one day on a really, really long hike with my dogs, I was like, wait a minute, do you know what I really want? I want like questions and answers and writing exercises and daily journaling prompts and live Q&As and on and on and on. I just think of everything that I ideally would want from a spiritual author. I like run back from my hike because I lived right off of the trail. and sit down and bang out in like 20 minutes this whole thing, this whole outline, which actually did become what the Zoco Inc. websites were. But I was like, they will have this every day, this every week, this once a month, this every other week. And you even could have a live Q&A once a month with the author with your monthly subscription. And the authors could choose and decide if they wanted to keep it like this very affordable subscription for $5 or $7 or $10 a month, or sort of something people will never back away from, or if they want to do something more high end, like that's $97 a month, etc. Like they just would have choices. And the idea being like, hey, if we sell this for like $12, let's say, $12 a month, or $97 if you pay for the whole year up front, or whatever the price was. I can't remember what the pricing was, but something like that. Then of course the authors to that core audience of people that were willing to pay, $12 a month, those would be the people that ideally would be going to their $3,000 live in-person seminars. I was like, these books have sold, some of them hundreds of millions of copies. Like there'll be hundreds of thousands of people that will want this. That is what I thought. That might be true now today, but we'll see what happens when we get there. So I get this amazing, amazing idea. I write it all down in 20 minutes. And when I tell you I am high and happy, I am high and happy. I go to bed. I wake up the next morning. I'm like on this hike and I'm fleshing it out more and more, and I'm seeing it. And I write down my ideal list. I said, number one client that I want for this, Don Miguel Ruiz. Weird, because he wasn't actually my favorite, but he really is the one that I wrote down. He was fine, but it wasn't my favorite book. My favorite books were like Heart of the Soul by Gary Zukav. So I wrote him down as my number 2 client. Then number 3 was Deepak Chopra. Number 4 was the Queen herself, Oprah Winfrey. And number 5, I don't remember who number 5 was. Maybe Eckhart Tolle or Carolyn Miss or someone, but I wrote down 5 names. And then I just started dreaming again for a whole other day. I took this 14-mile hike, so aggressive, down Long Canyon in Sedona. I was just dreaming of it and dreaming of it and dreaming of it and dreaming of it. And towards the end of the hike, I was like, wait a minute. There's only a couple of problems. Number 1, you don't know how to build this technology. You don't even know anybody who knows how to build this kind of technology because remember, this is 2002. And number 2, you don't know any of the people on this list. So just aside from those 2 things though, great plan. And I was busy. I had all my other companies going, and Sticker Junkie was going well. Delinquent Distribution was coming back around, and Hot Topic was just buying tons of stuff. All of those, I'm bad with names. Can I just call you dumbass? T-shirts, which I think actually is for sale again right now on Hot Topic. Losing Faith in Humanity, One Person at a Time, which is for sure for sale again right now in Hot Topic because we are reselling all those shirts. I used to have Superhuman Powers, but my therapists took them away. Also available right now at Hot Topic. So everything is just going really well in my businesses, and I don't have time and effort and energy to start this other company anyway, but man, I really, really want this. And so it sort of threw me into this 2 days of just legit being sad. I mean, being legitimately sad that I didn't know how to build this, that I didn't feel like I had the resources to build it. I mean, I live in the middle of fucking nowhere. I don't live in Silicon Valley, and I don't know any of these authors, and they live all over the country, and I don't have any contacts in entertainment. So I'm sad for 2 days, and I'm getting ready to go to the Raven Heart at night to just get out of my own head and go do some journaling and just whatever. And I'm standing in front of the mirror and I'm putting on my makeup and I'm looking at myself, and I hit my leg really hard, which is very unlikely, but I just to snap myself out of it, I just hit my fist on my leg while I'm doing my makeup. And I'm like, Andrea, if God wanted you to do this, you would be doing it right now. But I yelled that at myself, and I don't even talk that way. That is exactly what I said. But I don't talk about that. I'm not super religious, but that is how I put it. And I heard this thing where I was like, the universe provides. The universe provides. If this is what you're supposed to do next, then this is what you're going to do next. And if this is what's meant for you, then this is here for you. You need to let this go. But yelled at myself in the mirror, you need to let this go. And I felt the weight of that sadness lift off of me. And I just said, if this is meant to be, then it will be. And that is all. So then I go to the cafe and I'm writing in my journal, and I want to be really clear. I had no idea, none, zero at all whatsoever, none that I was attractive when I was like 26, 27 years old. Like I guess I kind of was like, well, maybe I am, because I always, up until that point in my life, thought I was hideously unattractive because bullying sucks. It just does. And so I always thought I was really unattractive because I would be measuring myself against women who'd had a different type of beauty than what I had. And the 80s and 90s were not good for the self-esteem of Gen X women. I am just saying. So, but all these guys are like hitting on me, and I'm like, just go away. I do not want to talk to you. And I'm writing in my journal. So this really, really handsome guy comes in and sits down directly across from where I can see him. I'm sitting in this armchair and I'm like, oh, I just don't want to talk to anyone. I don't want to be bothered. And he is very clearly staring at me, wanting to engage in conversation. I am giving him no time of day at all whatsoever. And then he is a really good looking guy. And then he pulls out a Rolling Stone magazine. And I was like, what? Now, in Sticker Junkie, I was advertising. I know this story is all over the place, but I promise all of this is important and it all comes together. But I was advertising in all of these big magazines because back then in the early 2000s, like that's how you got people to go to a website. People weren't really like advertising in that way on Google yet, or they just barely maybe were starting to in early 2002. And so I would advertise in Rolling Stone, Maxim, Blender stuff, etc. We got the back covers of those magazines for Sticker Junkie, and previous to that for anti-establishment clothing. I mean, for years, we'd spend $1 million a year advertising in magazines for Sticker Junkie. And it was the first time that I had ever advertised in Rolling Stone. And when you advertise in a magazine, you get advanced copies. So you get copies like whatever 2 weeks before the general public gets that particular issue, or at least this is how it worked back then when magazines were more of a thing. And I had not yet received the advanced copies of the Rolling Stone, but I could tell because of who was on that cover that that was the episode of the magazine that we were advertised in. And I hadn't seen it yet. And I was so excited. So I looked up at him and I immediately get up and just go sit at his table. And he is pleased as fucking punch. He does not know what has created this turn of events because he has been looking at me for like an hour to an hour trying to catch my attention. And what he later was like, I was just about to leave and I never would have approached you because you shot down 3 guys in a row. And I felt like I still had to go like shoot my shot with you, but like you did not seem like you wanted anyone to talk to you. And I'm like, I did not. Spoiler alert, this guy and I end up dating. So I go over to his table and I sit down. And I don't have permission to say his name, so I will call him Jack. So I sit down and I'm talking to Jack, and he's got the role. And I said, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I advertised in Rolling Stone magazine for the first time, and that's the issue. How even did you get this issue? This doesn't come out on the newsstands for like 2 more weeks. I don't remember how he got it, but he got it through some weird advanced way too. And so I'm looking at it and I see the Sticker Junkie ad in there for the first time and I go, that's my company. And he's like, what? He's like, I see this everywhere. I see this in magazines all the time because I spent $1 million in magazine ads. And he's sort of like, how are you this attractive woman? And you have this cool company, and now I'm talking to you, and I all of the want to marry you. That is what he was thinking. Pretty much exactly. At the very least, I really want to go on a hike and have coffee with you and take you to dinner and then maybe continue to do that every day for the rest of my life. Something right along those lines. So he is just thrilled with this turn of events, and we start talking, and I am heartbroken over another situation. And I'm like, I'm really just not dating right now, blah, blah, blah. So then we start talking, and it turns out that he's a tech guy in the Silicon Valley, owns a tech company. And I was like, what? No way. That's so weird because I have this idea and I am so excited about it, but I don't know how to build it. And I need X, Y, Z. I said, I need embedded, video in the page where people can't download it or rip it in some way, which by the way, used to be very fucking expensive to develop that kind of technology. This is a very long time ago. There was no app that would do that. It cost us like hundreds of thousands of dollars to build out that part of the technology because there weren't that many people that knew how to code in the early 2000s. So anyway, so I'm talking to him and I'm telling him this idea. I wouldn't even tell him the idea. That's right. I said, well, how do I know you're not just going to steal the idea? And he's just like laughing because there's a million ideas. And it's 2002. I'm not as savvy of a seasoned serial entrepreneur as I am now. And he goes, I'll tell you what, I'll meet you back here tomorrow night and I'll bring an NDA and I will sign this NDA so you can tell me the idea and whatever. But later, of course, he was like, I just wanted to see you the next night. I didn't care. There was no way I was going to steal your idea. And so he meets up with me the next night. I tell him this idea. He's like, whoa. He's like, that's actually a real, that is like, he was not expecting much out of this idea. He's like, whoa, that's actually a really, really good idea. I'm like, yeah, it is. And he goes, I'll tell you what, we will be partners on this. If you want, I will have my guys build out 100% of the technology. Like, that's easy for us. This is what we do. This is very easy for us. And you get the authors. And I said, well, I don't know any of the authors. He's like, you could walk up to anyone and meet them. You can get those meetings. It's fine. Like, I kind of will show you how. A little bit, because he was more corporate than I was. Like, I just had learned how to sell t-shirts, and that all seemed easy to me, but it was the business outside of t-shirts and stickers in the realm that I understood seemed really intimidating, like negotiating contracts with publishing companies. That all of that seemed really hard to me. It's not. It's the exact same thing as negotiating a contract for anything. Spoiler alert. If you know how to run a company, if you can get any company to, $4 million in revenue, you should be able to start a different type of company and get it to $4 million in revenue, because your processes, your understanding of operations, your understanding of all of the different moving parts, there's going to be a learning curve. Like when you're offering a service or a course or something that is going to be different than selling a consumer physical product. And every different, like starting a tech company is different than starting a company that sells shoes. But the underlying foundation of like, this is how you run a team, this is how you hire people, this is how you cover your ass legally, this is how you XYZ. All of those things are going to be the same across a lot of different businesses. And so is contract negotiation. So anyhow, he's like, I have faith in you, blah, blah, blah. So Jack and I become friends, just friends, because remember, I am not dating. And he keeps having to do business in Phoenix, and then would be like, okay, well, I'll drive up for an extra day and see you in Sedona. So this is going on for months and months and months. And then he really just starts asking me out. He's like, look, I really want to date you. And this guy was like a competitive jiu-jitsu fighter, super handsome, incredibly successful, self-made multimillionaire. And I'm just like, I don't know. He is the guy that all women my age were looking for. And he's tall, and he's just all of the things, and really athletic and really smart. And I didn't drink and he didn't drink. And like, we were just matching on so many life things, but I was still like, no, I'm good. I'm heartbroken. I don't want to date anyone, which I am certain made me even more intriguing, but it was not a strategy. And then he calls me one day, says, turn on the TV. And I had a housemate at this point who was running my offices, and she had a television. So I went back to her area of the house. It was this huge, like 3,800 square foot house on 9.5 acres in Sedona, and it was completely divided. So she had half of the house way over here. Then we had all of this common area, and then I had a half of the house way on the other side. So I go down to her side and I turn on the TV, and I said, what channel? And he's like, any channel. So I'm like, what the fuck? Arnold Schwarzenegger is on stage. I told you Schwarzenegger would come into it. And he's announcing his candidacy to run for governor of California. And standing right behind him is Jack. And I'm like, what? On the phone with me. And I was like, what the fuck? And he was like, will you go out with me now? I want to be a power couple with you. Will you go out with me? And I'm like, you're so ridiculous. Fine. I will go on a date with you. So I went to San Francisco, and we went on a date, and we started dating, and everything else sort of gotten forgotten. So Jack was like an early day tech entrepreneur who did stuff with fundraising for politicians on the internet. So in the early days of the internet, like when you first had shopping carts on the internet and the ability to check out on the internet, even Amazon becoming big, like Amazon and Zappos were sort of the first reasons, well, in porn, honestly, a lot of the first reasons that people put their credit cards in the internet was porn. And that's actually why the payment processing systems got built out for the internet the way they did. True facts, go look it up. It's just a fascinating story. And so anyhow, what hadn't quite gotten done on the internet yet, still in 2002, was the ability to take political donations, because there's like this whole extra levels of reporting that have to be done, and they're different jurisdictionally in every single state, in different localities, federally, et cetera. So there's a lot of law that you have to follow. So Jack had started one of those companies that enabled people to take political contributions over the internet. And he got a little piece of every contribution. So that did not suck. So Schwarzenegger somehow, like, he knew mutual people, and Arnold wanted him to come onto the campaign to advise them of all of this new emerging stuff that they could do with advertising while running for governor on the interwebs. So it's this new emerging technology, and like Arnold was running in 2003 in this special election race. And so it was sort of the first time where people were really starting to do stuff on the internet. And his campaign was one of the first campaigns that really generated a lot of dollars because people could very easily go and donate through this platform. They wanted him to come in and advise for the campaign itself. And so he did. And he became really good friends with the guy who was running that campaign, this guy named George Gorton, who is fucking fascinating. George Gorton is so fascinating, in fact, that there was a movie made about his life starring Jeff Goldblum called Spinning Boris, which was about how George Gorton had gone over to Russia and got Boris Yeltsin reelected. He had like an 8% approval rating, and these political spin doctors in the United States moved the whole entire population of Russia within like 6 weeks to maybe it was longer, maybe I don't think it was, maybe it was 12 weeks to reelect Boris Yeltsin to be the premier. Is it the premier or the president? It is the president of Russia. Suffice it to say, George is an influential guy. George understands persuasion. And he had made my ex-boyfriend, my at the time boyfriend, Jack, his number 2 in command on that campaign. And everything about Zoco had been just completely forgotten at this point. Like, I'm running Sticker Junkie. Hot Topic is buying millions of dollars worth of stuff. You know, I'm newly in love with this super great guy who is a super, super, super fantastic guy. And we're sort of gallivanting in this power couple, and we're just traveling all over the place and living our best lives. And we're both super, super wealthy, and we're staying at these like beautiful, beautiful hotels and just taking vacation after vacation and having so, so, so much fun with each other. And during this, I am running Sticker Junkie and Delinquent Distribution, and Jack is running his tech company and advising on the Schwarzenegger campaign. So we do not live in the same place. He like lives spending a bunch of time in Sacramento. He lives in San Francisco. I'm in Sedona. And we just are having this fun relationship. And that is how I got to go to Arnold Schwarzenegger's inauguration. And I went all out for my outfit for the inauguration. I got this like beautiful floor length leather skirt. You know, I was a yoga chick. I was in perfect shape, and I fucking hiked every day for hours. And this black like turtleneck with like a little bit of shimmer to it, super form-fitting, a big belt, perfectly accessorized, Prada boots, as one does. And Arnold Schwarzenegger's ex-wife, then wife, Maria Shriver, even complimented me on the outfit. So I was like, I know I've done this well, because a Kennedy just fucking complimented me on my outfit. And I had never been to anything like that. It was so fancy. I digress. So Jack has told me all about George Gorton, and then I see the movie Spinning Boris, which by the way is fucking fantastic. And then we all go out to Vegas together for something and do this whole amazing night at Red Square in Mandalay Bay and like go have this Russian food. And he's telling us the firsthand account, like all the shit that they couldn't put in the movies and all the true behind the scenes stuff. So I really like George too. So after they won the election, Jack and George are like on this flight to whatever else they're going to do next. And George says, hey, I have this opportunity to do this stuff with these Indian gaming casinos. And then I have another one that's just kind of personal. I don't know if you're going to want to do it. You know, Jack is really busy. Like, it was crazy of him to be able even to take the time away from his tech company in order to go work on the Schwarzenegger campaign. But he did. And he was just like, okay, cool. You know what, George? Anything that you want to work on together, I will work on with you, because it's going to be the most amazing life experience. True fact. So George goes, have you ever heard of the book, The 4 Agreements? He's like, Andrea just gave me that book. She gave me that. And then he opens up his backpack. I had just given him these books to read like a week before. I gave him all of Don Miguel's books. I gave him 4 Agreements, The Companion Guide to the 4 Agreements, and The Mastery of Love, which is Don Miguel Ruiz's other books, just for fun, just because he's on planes all the time. I'm like, yeah, I have the books in my backpack. Andrea just gave those to me. Like, what? And George is like, whoa. I am one of Don Miguel Ruiz's top naguals, and he wants to generate revenue from more than just doing speaking engagements and his books. And you're the tech guy. And so I was thinking like maybe there was something we could do on the internet. And Jack was like, what? You are not going to believe this, but Andrea has this whole business idea. That is how we met. That is how we first connected. So in 2002, I have this business idea. Then I meet this guy in a cafe, and then he pursues me for like 9 months before I take a date with him. And then we've been dating for like 6 months. So this is like 15 or 18 months after I originally had the idea. And into my lap, it just falls. Like, oh yeah, Don Miguel Ruiz was looking to redo his website. And Jack is like, Andrea has this whole business idea around that's called Zoco Inc. She didn't say it was a business idea. He said, I have a business. And then luckily my brother, David, what up, brother, is an fucking incredibly talented artist who also had learned how to code and develop websites. I asked him to learn how to code so that he could code the original Sticker Junkie website for me, which I already shared that story. And so he did this beautiful, gorgeous mock-up of what Don Miguel Ruiz's website could look like, with like daily questions, daily writing prompts, weekly blogs, monthly live Q&A, weekly videos that would come out that would talk about different concepts or answer different questions around his books. And you could at any time submit different questions that he would answer in any one of these formats. And there even was an early days podcast before they were called podcasts. So it was just such a cool idea. And then like 1 week after that conversation, I am in a meeting in Don Miguel's living room with George and all of the people that were running Don Miguel's staff. And I was like, this is the craziest, most law of attraction shit that has ever happened. I did not make one phone call. I did not tell anybody else that I even had this idea. I did not try and get the clients. We were so busy doing other stuff that idea just sort of fell by the wayside. And it was always something I was like, yeah, I really want to do this. But like, fuck, man, I was running 2 companies, both of which that were making well over $1 million in annual revenue. And I had a very small staff when I was in Sedona because it was really difficult to keep staff in Sedona. That is why I only lived there full time for 2 years, because my companies were scaling so big that I was no longer capable of producing all of the kind of stuff from the middle of nowhere. And Don Miguel and his team said yes, like immediately. They immediately were like, oh my God, when we presented this beautiful mock-up of what the website could be, we had it printed up on a really big piece of foam core and it just looked gorgeous. And it was really unusual to walk in with a physical thing like that to a meeting back then. We went to Kinko's and got it done. And they said yes immediately. And the relationship between Jack and I broke off. Of course, that is not his name, but he's just a great guy. He still is just a great guy. But it just didn't work out. And I haven't talked to him in years, so I don't know if he'd want me to use his actual name. And when we broke off our relationship, he just gave me that company. He's just like, here you go. You can just have this company. Like I'm so busy and I have other companies and this was always your passion. I'm not going to keep this from you. You don't have to pay me anything out for this. It's just yours. And it was a really sad breakup. We dated for a long time. We broke up, like it was a couple of years after that we broke up, but we just hadn't really done that much big stuff with the company other than we did build Don Miguel's site. So then many years later, I go and I'm a contestant on The Apprentice. And I think that show filmed in 2004 and aired in 2005. And we had finished Don Miguel's website in 2004. So I go on the show and NBC asked me, what's your favorite books? And I said, business book or non-business book? And they said, oh, nobody asked it that way, so just do both. And I was like, okay. So I said, well, I really like Atlas Shrugged. It's my favorite fiction. I don't remember what I said my favorite business book was. And then my favorite nonfiction is The Heart of the Soul by Gary Zukov. Well, there was someone on Gary Zukov's staff who loved The Apprentice, was a mega fan of The Apprentice, and happened to see this interview that I said that Gary Zukov was my favorite, and told Gary and Linda. So Gary and Linda ended up watching that season of The Apprentice after they had not watched it, just to see oh, who's this person who said that we're her favorite author? It would be interesting to see how she does on this show. And then my PR person who had a PR agency, this chick Ari that used to work for me, she had started her own PR agency. I hired her PR agency, and she reached out to Gary Zukov and Linda Francis and said, hey, we're sending up this PR package to go to all of these different places. Do you want to send us 100 copies of your book? Because we're going to put a bunch of Andrea's favorite thing in these PR packages that we're sending out to different magazines to get them to write articles on her and different TV shows to get her appearances on. And they said yes. And they said, and as a matter of fact, Gary and Linda would love to meet Andrea. They're doing this event. Can she come in Ashland? And I was like, yeah, I actually really can. That sounds super fun. I will go to that event for sure. And then we created a mock-up. So I set up a deal where I would take 100% of the financial risk, but that we would split any of the money that we made in the company 50-50, which felt really fair to me, to be honest, because it was all his work. And so he would get 50% of the profit, I would get 50% of the profit, but I would do 100% of the upfront cost because Gary and Linda had already done 100% on their side of actually creating the books and creating the content. But I would go up to Ashland and film all the stuff and create this really amazing, fantastical product. Now, remember, this is still like 2004 that we're working on this. Then The Apprentice comes out. And right as The Apprentice was airing was when Gary went back on Oprah talking about this product. Oprah herself wrote a letter that we were allowed to use on the sales page of the website, telling people to go buy this product. And we're gearing up for it. And I'm so excited. I got to fly out to Chicago and go to the Oprah Winfrey show. Oh, I skipped ahead. Sorry, because when I went to that event in Ashland, Oregon, David and I, my brother and I, had done a mock-up. With David did the mock-up. I just told him what should be on there. And he did a mock-up for Gary and Linda that said, like, hey, this is what your website could look like. And they looked at it and they're like, whoa, this is like Don Miguel Ruiz's website. We've been looking at that. It's so beautiful. And this kind of has that same layout. And I laughed and I said, yeah, my company did Don Miguel Ruiz's website. And they were like, what? We just were looking at that and we love it so much. And we really wanted something like that. And when we asked our web developers, they just like they didn't really know how to build whatever you had built there. And I'm like, yeah, we would love to take over that contract for you. So when they invited me to come up to their event, it was only because they knew I liked their book. They had no idea that I had built this other website that they loved. I had no idea that they had seen the website that I had built for Don Miguel Ruiz because I didn't put any credit to our company on it because we didn't even have a website ourselves for Zoco Inc. It just like we fell into this contract with Don Miguel Ruiz, then we fell into the contract with Gary Zukov. And when I got to go to Oprah and I was sitting in the front, I got to meet Oprah, say hi to her. Like, she does not fucking remember me. I like smelled her perfume. I literally like said hi. That was it. That was all. She did say some things directed to me when she was answering questions on stage. And she was like, when you're the rich one in the family, and she knew because she had just met me and was aware of who I was through Gary because her and Gary were really good friends. She's like, you got to always make sure you sign your own checks. Never give over check signing rights on your accounts ever, ever. And then a couple other little pieces of advice. But I like don't know her. She wouldn't remember me in any kind of way because even though Gary was talking about this product a little bit on the show, just like at the very end of like, oh, there's this thing at his website. And Oprah had allowed us to put that thing on our sales page. And she thought it was great. So I think she even said something about it on the show. Well, then the show didn't air straight away. Like it didn't air for a couple months. We were afraid it wasn't even going to air at one point, I remember. And once it did air, I was told by my friends who had gone on Oprah previously, who had written books, like expect to sell 40,000 copies of a book. That is what I heard was the number that you should expect to sell. And I said, okay, well, we'll probably sell that same just from being on Oprah for an hour. Because remember, guys, there's like barely any TV stations, like YouTube, not really a thing yet, and not that much content. So I was expecting 40,000 sales. Yeah, we got 70 sales. That is not even one sale for every country that the show airs in. I mean, when I mean to say it did not work, it did not work. Like at all. And remember, our price point's like $12 or buy the whole year for $97. So it made nothing. It made no money. None. It made none money. And the funny thing was, it took, 6 or 8 months to get everything together. And I am just paying through the nose to get professional photographers up there, to get professional videographers up to film all the content for that portion of the website. Like, it was so expensive to hire a film crew, hire the lighting people, hire the sound people, to go to film where Gary and Linda lived. Every part of the creation and development of it was so expensive. And I was paying for 100% of it, 100%. So like I'm building up the resentment around this a little bit, and just the process of it was hard and was not fun, which sometimes happens when you're building a business. It's a grind and it's not necessarily super fun. And so by the time that the show came out, that was the one question when I told this whole story to Jerry Hicks. He was like, the website failed. I'm like, it failed so bad. I think I just might have been too early. Like people weren't even still comfortable putting their credit cards in the internet. I didn't know how to properly sell a sales series. It just did not work. It just in every way didn't work. And I was testing everything on T1 lines, which was the fastest form of the internet back then. But back then when people would buy it, or even go to look like they were going to buy it and they were going to play a sample video, it would take like 10 minutes for the video to download. And I think we even had a video maybe on the sales page, so that would take forever to download. Just every part of it was bad, not good, and did not work. The content was fantastic. And then there was tons of customer service. These people are barely paying anything. They paid $12 or $100 for the year. Then they had a lot of customer service complaints because it was not internet savvy people that were using this service. So every part of it was just unfun. And Jerry Hicks was like, well, it's not really surprising then that that's how that ended. And I'm like, no, it's really not. But that was part of how I started to lose everything in the 2008 crash, was because I had put about $750,000 into Zoco Inc. And when I say I got nothing back from it, I got nothing, not nothing back from it. It only cost me money. And I ended up calling up my clients and just being like, I'm really sorry, you guys, this is just too early. Like the idea is it's just too early. The internet is not ready to put credit cards in or to use this technology in the way that I thought. People's internet access lines aren't even fast enough to play the videos. Like I know you can play it where you are because the internet, but someone in the middle of the country can't. And this just isn't working. There isn't enough money to make this continue to work. And so it was really sad. So we just shut it down. It was just a nightmare every single way that it could be. And then what was funny and what Jerry Hicks said made it the best law of attraction story was because he's like, when you let go and you were high and happy and you were so excited about this, it was like the universe went here, 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 here. But then you're like super sad that you broke up with Jack, which I was. I mean, it was devastating. I was so sad. And you didn't really love a lot of the client interaction with any of the authors. It wasn't any one of the one particular author because we were working with a lot of them. We had gone to meet with Deepak Chopra's like second in command, David Simon. We'd never started working with them, but I really loved David. It's just weird that it didn't work because everything fell into place. But then I got so sad at the breakup. And then I was so frustrated to have to do the part of the job that Jack was doing. Right? So when I say it wasn't fun because I'm like a bright, shiny salesperson. That is all that I want to do. And Jack is like straight up operations, get shit done, manage the tech team, all of that stuff. Well, all of a sudden I had to do both sides of that equation. So it was just expensive and unfun. And Jerry was like, that is what makes it the best law of attraction story, because you saw what happened when you were high and happy and you saw what happened when you were sad and depressed and getting resentful. You create your own reality. And if you were to have focused on all of the things that were really fun and really playful about it and, replaced that person with an actual another COO, like this could have had a whole different outcome. You are a powerful creator and you need to pay attention to where you put your attention, is what Jerry and Esther Hicks both were saying. If you don't know who Jerry and Esther Hicks are, they wrote a book called Law of Attraction. They wrote a book called Ask and It Is Given. They are the people in the 70s who originally coined the term Law of Attraction. And I have met them during this whole period of time. Like the movie The Secret reached out to me to ask me how to help them go viral because they knew that I had done Don Miguel Ruiz's and Gary Zukav's stuff. All of this sounds fucking crazy and not true, but that's why my book is called You're Gonna Think I'm a Pathological Liar. And I never did work with the people from The Secret, but like somebody from their team sent me like 25 DVDs of The Secret. And I was like, what the fuck is this? And I had like a letter in there like, hey, we're doing this campaign and we hear you're on the internet with a bunch of the Oprah authors. And if you want to help us with this campaign, they clearly did not need my help. They sold like 1 million copies of that DVD on a guerrilla marketing campaign. Also a fascinating story. And that DVD, The Secret, was originally supposed to be like a documentary about Jerry and Esther Hicks for Australian television, but it lost its funding. So it ended up becoming this self-released DVD that sold for like $25 each or something back in the day and just sold millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of copies. And then eventually Jerry and Esther Hicks actually got cut out of that movie, even though originally it was a documentary about their life. So who knows? That also is a fascinating story. So as promised at the beginning, Jerry Hicks really did tell me that this was the best law of attraction story that he's ever heard. And he told me that when I told him that whole story, that whole 45-minute long story over lunch in Del Mar with Jerry and Esther in San Diego. And it was all the high highs and all the low lows. They were a great audience. They laughed at just the right places. And when something magical happened, Esther like pointed out there was a pod of whales that were like jumping out of the ocean of Orca. And it was just like this magical day. And we were about to leave, and I was going to go back to Jerry and Esther's place and check out some new renovations they'd done. And Jerry's like, no, that is the best law of attraction story I have ever heard. And I was like, why? And he's like, because it wasn't just that you had the highest highs and that you all had manifestation after manifestation after manifestation after manifestation of like, oh, here, oh, you wanted Don Miguel Ruiz to be your first client? Here you go. You wanted Gary Zukov to be your second client? Here you go. You sort of kind of thought of this at first when your dad was sick and dying and you found that book, and then your front row center seat at Oprah. She is on stage talking about your company. She writes a sales thing for your company. How many rockets of desires had you launched along the way to have a company like this? Then you fall in love and you're super happy, and then your man gets to have this super fun adventure where he's advising the Schwarzenegger campaign. How random is that? You get to go to the inauguration. That is so random. Like, and then his business partner is like the top Nagual with Don Miguel Ruiz, and that's how you get the client. That's insane. But not only that, then you're heartbroken when you and Jack break up, which I really was. And then I wasn't just doing all the fun parts of the business anymore. Like, I had to go do Jack's part, which sucked. I'm not an operations person. That's why I have Brian at Sticker Junkie. He's our chief operations officer. I don't want to do that part. And so I started to just get resentful, and I'm heartbroken, and I don't like taking any of the calls from any of the people that I was dealing with in that company. Didn't matter if it was the authors or the publishers or anyone. I just wanted out of it because it really wasn't going well. And the more I felt that way, that was way before we were on Oprah. That was months before we were on Oprah. And he goes, it's no surprise that that failed. You are a powerful creator, and you need to be careful with where you put your attention. And I was like, whoa, shit. And even as I'm retelling you this story right now, there is plenty that I can focus on right now in Sticker Junkie, which is a scaling business, which is not the way that I want it to be. And there is plenty that I can focus on that is magical. And I am reminding myself in this moment, and I am reminding you as the listener, put your attention on fairy tales and magic. Recently, I got accused of just like being a dreamer. And I was like, yeah, who the fuck do you think starts billion-dollar companies? I spend so much of my time dreaming and visualizing and thinking of what we're going to do in the next thing. When I'm hiking in Sedona, even now to this day, you bet your fucking bottom dollar, I am doing a full-on, full-scale visualization of like premiere night, that Sticker Wars, this documentary that I want to sell to Netflix about the madcapped world of stickers, premieres, and like there's the flashing lights and the red carpet and the Netflix behind us and the Sticker Wars logo, or the making of a billionaire when that TV show does roll out in a big scale, when the podcast does start to catch traction, when it's not just my first 1,000 fanatical fans. I'm so thankful that you're with me, guys. But when we cross over and have like 100,000 views, when we cross over and have 1 million plays on the audio version, that's going to be so insane. I think about the releases that we're going to do with future companies through Power Chick Mafia, or when I fucking finally clear it out with all of the regulatory compliance that I have to do in order to be able to actually show people how to flip on compounding returns legally. I got to go through a whole bunch of steps before I'm even allowed to say what I had to cut out of the last episode. And I dream of all these things. Like, I dream of having a huge, massive scale conference where I teach people how to trade, or I teach people how to do entrepreneurship, or a massive like visualization about Sticker Junkie having, 1,000 of the cutting machines out on the floor. We have 5 right now, or like a staff of 300 or 400 people. We have 16 right now. I have to dream and hold to the vision of what I want. And when you're growing and when you're scaling, no one needs to tell me how fucking hard it can be to stop and think of all the positive outcomes and all of the amazing things and what it actually looks like on the other side and accomplishing it. And that is a fucking superpower. There is a reason that like Olympians visualize their ski run or their toboggan run or whatever it is. There is a reason that UFC fighters are visualizing the positive outcome of that fight. Our mind is the most amazing asset that we have. And we do get to use our own minds for pleasure. And that's what that story always helps me to remember. So I hope it was good. I hope you liked it as much as I did. I've told that story many, many times over the years, but very rarely do I get to tell the long format version of it. And so when I get to the end of it and I'm at the table with Jerry and Esther Hicks, and Jerry is saying that is the best law of attraction story I've ever heard. He goes, that is the best law of attraction story I've ever heard. Will you tell it again? And I told him the whole ass story. I told him the whole ass story. I told him the whole fucking story I just told you. I told him the 45-minute version of that story. And I looked at him and he looked at me, and then I looked at Esther and she looked at me, and I was like, and she was like, and I go, you want me to tell that whole entire story again? Esther goes, you want her to tell that whole entire story again? And Jerry goes, yes, it's the best law of attraction story I've ever heard, and I want to hear the whole entire thing again. And then this time he asked me like a bunch of questions in between about like how vibrationally I was feeling when each different thing happened and all of the aspects in my life, and really brought out to me the way that the law of attraction does actually work. And when I tell you I have forgotten so many times over the years, I have forgotten it so many times over the years, but I am very glad to be at a point in time in my life where I remember that that's how it works. So that's it for this episode of Andrea Lake 101, The Making of a Billionaire. I hope you guys have the most wonderful, excellent day.